Battles Magazine, still an excellent wargame magazine, possibly the best wargame magazine out there, and incredibly enough, still out there. Yes, it is still being published. Many people have started despairing because it has been, I believe, over a year since we have had an issue of the Battles Magazine. Subscribers and readers really got annoyed in the meanwhile. Here you have a full page of hate mail, pretty much, of insults and things like that that annoyed readers wrote to the publisher. I had to say, kudos to the publisher for having the honesty of publishing negative mail. Usually people just forget about that, they only talk about good stuff. I like the honesty here. Battles Magazine, excellent. You have articles, reviews, very nice color illustrations, just very, very good stuff. A professionally made magazine, no doubt. As for the content of their articles and reviews, there are things that I completely agree with, there are reviews that I vehemently disagree with, but this is the beauty of it. This is the beauty of having a magazine. I can get to learn about opinions that I disagree with without having to be in the same room with a person that has those opinions, so there's no fight. Oh, how awesome is that? The game also comes with a magazine. Did I just say that? The magazine also comes with a game. The game is Flodden 1513. The cover is devoted to that topic. Flodden 1513, a battle of the Renaissance that depicts part of a Scottish invasion against the English. And yeah, we have the battle of the two sides. The game was designed with a very specific philosophy in mind, that is an attempt to capture the frustration and chaos of the chaos on the battlefield and the frustration of the commanders due to, well, the confusion that happens in the battlefield, orders that get lost, commanders that misunderstand the orders or simply do not follow them. So players in this game will have limited control over their units. This is something that some people like, some people don't. Let me tell about the mechanics of the game, let me show you the components, and then we'll try to come up with a general assessment of the game. Here's the map of the game, and the game is set up and ready to be played. The map, as you can see, has unusual proportion. It is very long, not very tall, and it is divided in three main sections. You have a section at the center with the map of the area where the confrontation takes place, and you have units that I have placed on the map already according to setup instructions, with the Scots waiting for the English to attack, the English that will enter in turn 1 from that area of that edge, and also the English will receive reinforcements later in the game. This is not the only way in which you can set up the game. There are multiple scenarios, and even in this scenario you could choose to experiment with different configurations for the Scots as long as they more or less set up in this area. So here you have the map, pretty traditional. You know what the map is, you know what hexes are, what counters are. Some of these counters, however, are a little unusual because they are very big. Look at that, you have a counter there which is 3 hex long. That's not something you see every day. Actually, I think it's the first time I see such a long counter. Counter that cover 2 hexes and represent long lines of infantry. Yes, I've seen those before, but this is a new thing for me. Now, however, here you have these areas here, one for the Scots and one for the English. What are these areas for? Well, this area of the map pretty much represents the zoom-in version of the units that you see on the map here. Here you see a unit at a distance, and here you see the same unit in more detail. These columns here form units. For example, these 3 columns form that unit, which corresponds to that counter, and these 2 columns are another unit. Here you have a unit of a single column, and so on and so forth. So each hex covered by a unit on the board is represented by a column here. That means the part of that unit which is in this hex here, the rightmost hex covered by the unit, is represented by these counters here. The people that are in the hex in the center of the unit are represented by this column, and these are the guys represented by this column. So you have a lot of possibilities and options here because you can set up the bands. These individual counters are called bands. You can set up the bands in different ways. You can experiment with different configurations of rows and columns from game to game and try with different tactical experiments. I definitely like that. And then as units take hits during combat and they may get hit from different directions, you reorganize the people on the board to kind of like tighten the ranks and fill in the gaps. So, really neat idea here. You have the big picture here, and then you have the detailed picture here. As for the units, they have two numerical values printed on them. One is the combat factor, the other one is morale, and there is a letter indicating the type of unit represented by that counter. P is for pikes, G is for gentleman, H for Highlander. The Scots have a lot of pikes, really a lot of them, but they do not have a lot of long-range units. They do not have a lot of firing units, and the opposite is pretty much true for the English that's set up on this side of the board. The same applies to them. This unit is represented by a 2x counter on the board. And the English have a lot of long-range units, a lot of longbow, as you can see here, and also they have some cavalry there. Cavalry, of course, gives you a lot of cool advantages, as it usually does in games that include that type of unit, but they do not have pikes. So, here's the situation. Game is ready to start, but before I start the game, let me tell a little bit more about the rules and the mechanics of the game. This game uses an order system. That means that units will have to follow orders that will affect their behavior on the board. Here, units have several possible orders that you record on this log here. For each unit, you record the order that it has in each turn, in each moment of the of the battle, in each turn of the battle. And possible orders include stand, well, the unit doesn't move but fights if the situation requires it. Advance, the unit moves up to its full movement allowance against an enemy unit. The unit has to try to get as close as possible to the closest enemy unit. Redeploy, cavalry units can move freely to a specific location on the board. Standoff pike, that is what in Napoleonic war games is called a square. That is, the units that have pike use pikes as a defensive tool, and all of the sides of the unit count as front sides. A line advance, the unit doesn't have to spend its entire movement factor when moving against an opponent. It can spend less movement points if that allows the unit to remain aligned with the target unit. Recall, that is for cavalry, that disengages from contact with infantry. Charge, that is for cavalry, that way around, trying to smash into infantry. Hold, you are ready to change your order, waiting for another order, and then other two things, pivot and formation change. Okay, so you give it the orders and that's it, right? So cool, and then you can change the order at will, right? Yeah, no, kind of, sort of, no, not at all. You can change orders at will only for your overall commander, for the unit of the overall commander, the king for the Scots, and this unit, oops, no, the surrey for the English. So if I want to change orders for the Scots, and I simply change the order for the king. However, if I want to change orders for other units, I have to send that order, and orders emanate from the overall commander. So orders for the Scot scout player, in this case, will emanate from here. That means that if you want to change the order of another unit, you have to count the distance from the overall commander to the unit that is receiving the order. So you count the hexes that separate the two units, you roll 1d10. And that roll indicates the distance that the herald sent by the commander covers in a turn. So if you roll a number which is equal to or higher than the distance, the herald gets there and the order is changed. If not, the order doesn't make it to the target unit on time. Suppose that I'm trying to change order for that unit and I roll a 4, then I take a counter representing a herald and I simply indicate the distance traveled by the herald. 1, 2, 3, 4. Next turn, I can roll 1d6 to represent the further distance covered by the herald until the herald reaches the target unit. Then the herald is removed and the order is changed accordingly. So you may have to work a little bit to change your orders, and after you do that, know what? The commander that you sent an order to may just choose to ignore. Yes, because also mandatory results mandated by this table, you roll on this table during the order phase, at the beginning of the turn, when you try to change your orders or you decide to keep your orders, but then the commanders that are under you also have independent ability to make their own decision independently from you. So, for example, these two leaders, you roll a d10, will advance on a 1 to 4. They just like to advance. That's what they do. No change on a 5 to 8. There are other units that are more reliable. No change means that they keep the same order that they have. So if you send an order, there is a little more of a chance for these guys that they will keep that order. Otherwise, your units may just stop cold in the middle of an advance. They may start advancing when you do not want that. The chaos, confusion, and frustration of battle is definitely well captured by this mechanics. There are also modifiers. For example, the King of the Scots has limitations when it comes to spending orders, but these are the general concepts connected to the order system. Once orders have been assigned, then you resolve the other phases of the turn. First, the cavalry units that have a charge order charge, so they simply move in contact with their target, but you do not resolve the attack yet. Then you have general movement, in which you move the other units. Of course, I'm talking about when you are the active player. This is a player's turn sequence. So when you're moving your general units, you spend movement points to move your units. Infantry units have very strict limitations when it comes to movement. Tendentially, they just move towards the enemy. No fancy, crazy maneuvers. Cavalry has a lot more freedom. Artillery, Scottish artillery never moves. It can pivot to reach to aim at a target, but cannot move. And for these long units, you can move frontally, or more complicated, you can pivot using one of the two sides as the pivot, and this unit could also pivot like that, but it needs some space to do that, because it can only move by 2. You can't leave it like this as a mess in the middle of a bunch of other units. Very important also, units do not get in contact with each other. You cannot put friendly units adjacent to one another unless it's a mistake, unless it's necessary. But usually you don't want to do that because you like to spread out your units around. This is what the rule says. After movement, you have a chance to use offensive or to launch an offensive range attack. So if you have units that can do that and they're in range, then you can resolve that. Let me show you how you resolve range attacks. It's very simple. You look at that table pretty much. The table will tell you the section of the table that you need to use depending on the type of unit that is firing and the range. For example, if you're firing with longbows from the front ranks at 1 hex of distance, use this section of the table. you roll on the line corresponding to the target that you're firing at, the band that you're firing at, and then you simply roll 1d10 and look at the results. In this case, for example, suppose we're firing at Bills, 1 to 4 no hits, 5 to 0 1 hit. Longbows in the front ranks at 2 hexes range, or Moss Troopers at 1 hex range. Use this section of the table. Then you have the defensive shot. Yes, the defender, the non-active player, may get a chance to shoot at you, and then units that are in contact will fight. At that point, after all the back and forth of range attacks, you have combat. Combat is resolved, well, combat, it's pretty neat, because not the entire unit may be involved in contact. Maybe only part of the unit is in contact, then only the columns that are involved in the fight will actually be taken into account. You may have overlapping, in which case the overlapping units can lend support by granting modifiers. You can also have positive modifier if you have support from pikes from the second rank, and then there are other modifiers, and the modifier that really can make a difference is the one based on the weapons. So you look at the attacker band, defender band, cross-reference, and you see what kind of modifier you may get. At that point, you take all of your modifiers into account, you roll 1d10, and here we go. You have the results on the combat table. You may be able to eliminate enemy bands. You may have to force the opponent to check morale. Different type of possible results. You simply apply the results, and that resolves combat. Very simple, as you can see. But there are a lot of different and interesting possibilities. For example, if you're attacking a flank, then you choose the weakest band in that flank. A lot of possibilities that come from the fact that there is so much detail here when it comes to the actual formation within each unit. Morale checks, those are very important. Morale checks are not checked by individual band, by individual unit, but by column. Suppose that this column here receives a morale check result and needs to check morale. Then you roll only 1d10 for the entire column, and you compare the result with the morale of each unit. If you roll equal to or less than the morale of the unit, the check is passed. If you roll above the morale of a unit, the check is failed. Then you turn the unit, and there are penalties, of course, for that. Not a small one is that you're getting closer to getting your unit routed. When the number of demoralized units and double the number of killed units, that means each killed band counts 2. Well, you total those demoralized and killed times 2. When the total equals or exceeds the morale of the unit, then the entire unit routes, which is of course pretty bad. Also, there are leaders. Leaders cannot change their formation. They can't even move from column to column. This is why they're printed on the map. When they're alive and well, there is no positive effect for you. Well, pretty much that has been factored in. But when they are killed, and that may happen in several occasions, especially after combat, when they're killed or taken, you place a marker there, and then losing a leader results in a penalty to future morale checks. This is the main idea. After combat, then you may try to recover morale. For example, if a unit did not move and did not attack, then you can recover morale. Then the other player goes to the same sequence of events, and you continue like this from turn to turn until the end of the game. And at that point, the number of enemy units that you manage to rout will determine who the winner is. Did I like the game? Yes, I did. Will you like it? I don't know. Maybe you won't. This is not a crowd pleaser. The philosophy behind the design limits the control that the players have over their units. Things take on a momentum that the players cannot control. Things become chaotic. Not everybody likes that. Some players like to have more of a game. Here, you very often have the impression of being in the battlefield. There's a simulation atmosphere here. It is still not complex and detailed as many simulations are, but you have a system that does capture precisely the challenges that the commanders had at the time. As a result, things are not under your control. You're not the entity that floats over the battlefield. You are the guy in command, sending out orders and crossing fingers. Because of this, there is a random factor. You may not be able to do the things that you want. If you play this in the right spirit, the game is actually fun, precisely because you have a little bit of a zen approach to it. You try to control things and then you let things happen, and you go along with the ride, even though the ride may lead you to complete and certain in total disaster. For this reason, though, the game works very well for solitaire gaming. The deployment has a secret component that probably would work better with two players playing the game. But the fact that you do not know exactly what your units are going to do next makes the game unpredictable to a degree that the game becomes very enjoyable as a solitaire experience. Also, because of the designer's desire to stick to historicity, the game is not balanced. But the game is pretty short. You can definitely play it in under 2 hours, probably even in less than that. So I think in most cases you will play in less than that. That means that in most cases you will be able to play 2 games back to back. If you're playing against another opponent, then you switch sides, and the lack of balance is mitigated by that, because it's not about winning against the opponent, but doing better than the opponent did with the side that is a disadvantage here. Complex enough to really hit a soft spot, that is the ability of capturing enough of a historical event to really give you a good historical sense. I like how you can organize your columns, your units. I like the tactical possibilities. It's great to have all of those things, even though in many cases you won't be able to use them because there are just so many restrictions. But it is great that if the situation arises, then all the tactical thinking that you did pays off. Intense action, and pretty much a two-phase experience. Maneuvers at the beginning, players move their units move faster or slower than they're supposed to, but clearly they are approaching each other. Once the units lock in combat, well, cavalry still can move around, but in most cases then it is just a matter of hitting each other until one of the 2 units is disintegrated. And there aren't so many units on the board, and considering that routing units is the key point here, you see how it can easily happen that a couple of bad rolls or incredibly good rolls may allow a player to gain enough of an advantage that in a game on such a small scale, only 8 turns, it may be almost impossible for the other players to recover. So you have a random component when it comes to the orders, but you also have a random component which is pretty substantial when it comes to resolving battles. This being said, let me go back to the main point. Do I like it? Yes, because I like to play games in solitaire. I like to play games that give me a strong sense of an historical event without necessarily bogging me down with the 200 pages of rules. This definitely does all that. It's a compact, tight experience. It gives me a nice snapshot of an historical event. I can play it by myself. Setup is a little bit of a chore because you had to organize all of those units, but if you play multiple games, then the units are around. Setting up a second time is not bad at all. I like it, looks beautiful, comes with the excellent magazine. I'm not going to recommend it wholeheartedly to all war gamers because I can see why many would not like it. Many players will want to be more in control of things. There are variants of the game that will allow you to do that. But in a certain sense, if you want to play games where you have more controls, maybe you can just look for those instead of playing one. It was designed according to a different mindset and then can be tweaked to fit your requirements. Battles magazine, Flodden 1513, excellent magazine, a game that I liked, a game that I hope you will like, and actually I hope you will give it a try. But if you don't write hate mail to me. Don't say I didn't warn you. This is a great game, in my opinion, but not a game for everybody.